A pleasure to meet all at last, and we are back at it once again with films I should have talked about years ago. Now, for this instance, I feel like that what some people might not understand is that there's a good amount of hits from the 70s that played up quite well to the unique phenomenon at the time known as the car chase. And while this is technically regarded as a well-known 70s cliche, it has carried on well into the present day, to the point in which that sometimes it gets a bit on the explosive side. Not to mention with many other things that some of us could be talking about other than what makes a car chase a car chase. Well, there's plenty more I could talk about in regards to that, but in any case though, I don't want to get too distracted because we do have a few other films to talk about. Maybe a lot more than that. And I'm at least glad that some of the weather has been getting a bit on the warmer side. And if not, then well, my ongoing efforts to get this room a bit more on the insulated side, as well as to help keep heat going throughout this particular part of the house. I hope it does get to a point where I can use this a little more often, even during the off season. In any case though, we'll head on back to 1974. A little ways from Born to Be Wild, and start talking a bit about a certain film starring the likes of Adam Roarke, Susan George, and Peter Fonda, Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. Yeah, so while that is actually a unique, eye-catching title, the rest of the film is just beyond most comprehension. You could think of this sort of like, let's say, a mixture of Dukes of Hazzard before Dukes of Hazzard even existed, and top it off with a few other notable exceptions. Well, many different components of this film solidify this as a film more than worth watching. And I'm glad that I've had this on my YouTube channel, well, in the movies and TV segment at least, because I purchased this all the way back in 2013. So, if that really does not give a good testimony as to how incredible this film is, let me explain. The film first starts off in a motel room in which that we see Peter Fonda and Susan George sleeping in the morning while Adam Roarke pulls up inside of a blue Chevrolet. Well, this Chevrolet is actually meant to pick up Peter Fonda's character Larry, and the Adam Roarke character is known as Deke Summers, whom is actually a mechanic for Larry. You see, Larry was once known to be a pretty good race car driver, and Deke was a good mechanic friend of his. And as for Susan George's character, well, she's just known by the name of Mary, a person that he had met pretty recently. And considering that they were in a motel, it's kind of obvious what had happened the previous night. In any case though, Mary finds out that the two have sped off, and I will say she becomes a lot more important later. But what happens first off is that the likes of Larry and Deke, they confide with each other and discuss a certain plan. A plan to step up their game in the racing department and upgrade their ride, hopefully. How they plan to do this is to go to a certain local supermarket in the town that they're currently in, rob the guy blind. But since they know they can't exactly do it the conventional way by letting it close down and then sneak into it through a broken window or door, they instead do it a different way. Deke heads into the manager's house and hold his family hostage, while Larry will walk into the store and into the office of the manager himself. And, well, arrange a phone call. As the manager's family is held hostage, he is forced to give up the money inside the safe. $150,000 in 1974, which ballpark estimate would equate to well over $435,000. Now that alone is impressive, but by all accounts, what we have here is a big, epic Grand Theft Auto scheme. So there you go, another thing I just tossed out there. But this, of course, was way ahead of its time. The thing is, though, it certainly wasn't uncommon for automobile-related heists to take place, as most of the time the perpetrators involved would have a certain plan like this in motion. I guess you could think it's almost like a primitive version of Watch Dogs? Yeah, I know. I'm going a little overboard with the references here, probably because of how much I've experienced in the last 15 years or so. Well, in either way that you look at it, the manager's left helpless, because it does seem to him that every time he calls back to the house to check on his family, Deke is on the other end telling him that, well, he's going to have to wait until the call is put to him. Soon enough, though, they find out that there was actually a machine on the other end and not Deke himself. So while this was a unique way to buy them time, it didn't get them that much time. Because on top of getting some distance away from the store, the cops are now called in to go after him. A blue 67/68 Chevrolet is unbound with two suspects carrying a large load of money in their trunk. And on top of that, we eventually get to see Mary end up in this whole phenomenon. So that is, of course, pretty wicked. Oh, but the real trouble starts when the police start figuring out whom is, in fact, involved in all this. And then, of course, when they finally catch up to the likes of the three and the car itself, some epic police chase scenes ensue. Now, for the time, this actually was pretty unique to put together. And I will probably suggest that the setting of this whole film production must have been one of a kind. Even for just the time, I get the feeling that some people might look at this film a bit differently. But think about it. Back then, there weren't all too many cliches to build up from within. It was merely a starting point or a driving point that allowed them to eventually get to where they were hoping to go. And a movie like this was able to establish something known as the car chase. And many other films of the 70s would come along. And of course, there were a few other examples that preceded Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry. So you could say they practically cashed in on this whole thing. But at the same time, they were at the point in which that they were able to use car chase scenes in a big way. For the big screen, perhaps. For at home viewing, contrast to what TV shows and other phenomenons have shown up, it's certainly one of a kind. In any case, though, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. One police car's hood ends up falling apart, and one ends up diving into some water. But the real trouble starts coming around when a bridge starts going upward to let boat traffic pass through. The Chevrolet pierces through the blockades and then goes straight through the jump. Oh yeah. Just think, this was a few years before Dukes of Hazzard came around. Oh, but the Dukes of Hazzard reference will become even stronger later on in the film, because what eventually happens is that they get to a meetup. In this spot in particular, they actually trade cars. They go from a Chevrolet to a Dodge Charger. And oh man, I do love the chartreuse color that they chose for it. That paint job alone. Knowing the Charger had dozens of different paint options back in the day, and these were stock dealer options, by the way. It wasn't all too often nowadays where you can get these sort of color variations. A lot of times, the reason that people would do so is because it's an expensive custom paint job. Sometimes with different finishes, sometimes with decals. Yeah, you know, the customization department is off the rails nowadays. But think about it, back then, a Dodge Charger could have a lot of colors to choose from, stock, and from the dealer too. I can't really say for sure what the pricing was like back then for a custom paint job, but I get the feeling that because there were so many options at the time anyways, it wouldn't have mattered that much. Because what are the chances that people would not be able to find a color they liked? Probably not very much. Well, the thing is that this Charger is insane. When the cops actually catch up to them, the Charger slices through the door, and the second act of this whole thing takes place. And I might as well talk a bit about the police. I mean, you got yourself a lot of squad people to look out for. One of the most notable members would have to be Hank, a higher ranking official who ends up going into the garage in order to find an interceptor that has been heavily modded and customized, an unlimited top end. So, is that actually the truth here? Well, what happens is that the interceptor is taken from the garage after the mechanic confirms that it's ready to go, and this Hank guy, he'll of course play a much more critical role later on. The Charger of course speeds on with a number of different cops going hand in hand, tail and tail, and there even becomes a point where the cops actually become thrown off, and an entire intersection full of them gets cleared out so that the Charger can make their way through. Of course, they stop at a bar and play some pool along the way. $1.85 for drinks, I might as well mention, compared to, what, $10.40 per drinks? Who really knows? Either way you look at it, though, this kind of diversion just doesn't last very long, because the cops do eventually regain the pursuit. And they resume their operations on this whole takedown of these 3 criminals wanted for mass possession of cash, kidnapping, robbery, and of course, evading a lot of officers and destroying a lot of their cars. But of course, it really becomes grim when the Charger actually goes into an orchard and ends up slamming into some guy's red pickup. Holy crap, it's pretty much out of nowhere, and the wheel ends up dented. Thankfully, Deke is able to fix it, but of course, Larry and Mary get into a bit of an argument. This is of course not to mention that Larry and Mary have had a lot of tension like this before. In fact, when they were working on the Chevrolet earlier in the film, when they parked into a barn after crashing into a fence, they unfortunately go their separate ways, but not until Mary's convinced to head back because Deke apparently needs her help. So, kind of cheap when you put it, but it does make sense, being that Mary tried to leave, but then when Deke told him, Larry had to go back. So anyways though, once the wheel is fixed, the driver of the pickup is seen as okay, thankfully. This definitely enrages Hank, and he goes right on after those guys. And man, let me tell you, that Interceptor is not something to mess with. Even worse, the millions of insults he throws at him. I get the feeling that it's probably not just because of what happened to the pickup driver that they hit earlier. Well anyways though, Hank puts up an incredible fight against the likes of the 3, but unfortunately, at an intersection, he smashes into a wagon, and the wagon crashes into a telephone line, bringing it down on top of Hank's Interceptor. Of course, even though the mechanic said it was good to go, they still had a few kinks they needed to tweak up. This, of course, brings about the attention of the leader. He and a helicopter pilot are all coming around nearby. They see the Charger, and they attempt to take it out themselves. Because that's how crazy the guy is. He's about as crazy as Larry himself. Yeah. Fuel unfortunately runs low, so they had no choice but to ground the helicopter. And of course, more commands are put in for the police cars, which does seem like a complex and perplexing sort of series of maneuvers. But what this is supposed to do is it's supposed to get Larry to confuse himself and eventually run into the path of another cop. But with the help of Mary and the map that they're holding, they're actually able to find their way out of this massive maze. And just when you think they're gonna be okay and get out of there in one piece, out of nowhere comes a freight train. Holy crap. And they smash into it and explode. Holy crap. That's one crazy way to end a film. I mean, Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, the whole film itself is full of some dirty things worth saying and crazy stuff worth performing. I mean, the title makes sense and all, but still. Considering the fact that the police didn't catch them, it's insane that the railroads, the very thing that even brought cars to life in the first place, allowed for their car to blow up. With all 3 of them inside, the cash to be burned, as a little acoustic song plays in the background, and the end credits just show the car on fire. No survivors, no cash to reclaim. Just nothing but straight up history being burned to a crisp. I feel like I said a lot about this film, but it's better to be worth watching it right about now rather than just watch this video, because the movie itself may be a lot longer, but it sure does a much better job explaining the plot, story, characters, and whatnot than I ever probably could. Because that's just how dirty and crazy this entire escapade is. So for my overall scoring of Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, a film like this sure does deserve a good one. 8.8 out of 10.1. And with that in mind, thank you guys for watching this piece. And make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.